Hi, I'm Jacob.
Hi, I'm Parker.
Hi, I'm John Carlson.
Hi, I'm Hannah, and this is our Singapore synopsis where we'll be discussing the economic, political, and cultural situation in their country.
We are going to begin by talking a little bit about the land. The Republic of Singapore is a city-state located about 85 miles north of the equator at the southern tip of the Malay Peninsula. The city of Singapore is technically the capital of the Republic of Singapore. This Southeast Asian country is about 725 square miles large and has a population of about 5.6 million people. Singapore is the largest port in Southeast Asia, and the Strait of Malacca runs through the country, which allows connection between the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea. Roughly two-thirds of the main island are less than 50 feet above sea level, and its highest summit of Tamar Hill only has an elevation of 531 feet. Because of the low elevation and excess water runoff from cleared land, Singapore oftentimes has troubles with severe floods. Its climate can be characterized as consistently warm, having average monthly temperatures ranging from about 81 degrees Fahrenheit in June and 77 degrees Fahrenheit in January. Singapore will have consistent precipitation and humidity throughout the entire year. Despite having warm monthly average temperatures, the warmest recorded day in Singapore history was only 97 degrees Fahrenheit.
Now that Jacob has talked about the basic facts of Singapore, I'll be discussing the country's government. So, Singapore was under British rule for 144 years, and they were actually considered to be a part of Malaysia up until 1965 when they finally broke away and gained independence. Similar to the US, Singapore's government is broken into three branches: the legislative, executive, and judicial, but they're officially a parliamentary democracy. Singapore has both a president and a prime minister, and the president is the head of state, meaning that he or she is just the face of the country, whereas the prime minister is the head of government and is in charge of pretty much everything in the government, and they have the most power of anyone in that country. Currently, Lee Hsien Loong is the prime minister, and he's held that position since 2004 because the prime minister in Singapore doesn't have term limits. And for the first time ever, a female is the president, and her name is Halimah Yacob, and she was elected in 2017. The presidential term limits are a maximum of two 6-year terms as well.
Despite being a developing nation, Singapore has a high income economy with a gross national income of 54,540 US dollars. Singapore provides one of the world's most business-friendly environments for local entrepreneurs and is ranked among the world's most competitive economies. After rapid industrialization in the 1960s, Singapore has averaged a GDP growth rate of 7.7% since its independence from Britain in 1965. In the recent years, Singapore experienced a growth rate in its economy of 3.2% in 2018 and a decrease to a growth rate of just 0.7% in 2019. According to official data from the World Bank, the GDP of Singapore was 382 billion US dollars. Despite its consistent growth in GDP, the Ministry of Trade and Industry is projecting a decrease of 1 to 4% in 2020, as it has seen a 2.2% downgrade in the first quarter of 2020. In 2018, Singapore's public debt was 198 million US dollars, amounting to 113.63% of its GDP. Singapore's largest industry is manufacturing by far, contributing 20 to 25% of the nation's annual GDP. Key industry clusters include electronics, chemicals, biomedical science, logistics, and transport engineering. Close behind the manufacturing industry is financial service industry. Home to over 200 banks, Singapore's financial service industry has experienced steady growth due to its pro-business environment and political stability. According to the Observatory of Economic Complexity, Singapore ranks 15th in the world in exporting with 320 billion annually and 16th in importing with 293 billion annually. Singapore's top exports include integrated circuits, refined petroleum, and computers, while similarly its top imports are integrated circuits, refined petroleum, and crude petroleum. The three largest companies in Singapore are Jardine Matheson Holdings, DBS Group Holdings, and Jardine Strategic Holdings.
Thank you, Parker. I'm now going to talk about Singapore's culture. The culture of the Republic of Singapore is very interesting because it has been heavily influenced by both Asian and European cultures and is oftentimes categorized as a country where East meets West. According to the Constitution of Singapore, Malay is the official language of Singapore, but serves more as a symbolic role because Malays are recognized as the indigenous people of Singapore and the government values protecting their language and heritage. Also, according to the Constitution, the four commonly used languages of Singapore are English, Chinese, Malay, and Tamil. Despite being home to 10 religions like Buddhism, Islam, Hinduism, and Christianity, the Republic of Singapore has no official religion. The Republic of Singapore takes pride in being a fine city and is notorious for sentencing heavy fines or sometimes even jail time for crimes such as littering, jaywalking, public drunkenness, and spitting.
Today I'm going to be conducting a cage analysis between Singapore and the United States. Today we're going to be looking at 4 different factors that will look at the cultural, administrative, geographical, and economic distances between the two countries. So the cultural distance between these two countries is relatively small, considering they're both multi-religious, multi-ethnic, and boast several different languages throughout both of the countries. Now, if we look at administrative distance, it's also considered very short. The US and Singapore are both considered free democratic societies. However, Singapore is a bit more strict in terms of certain laws. So if you look at the US, throwing gum on the sidewalk, for example, is something that would not catch any attention. But in Singapore, you can actually be fined thousands of dollars and even face jail time. So they're both free and democratic societies, but the administrative distance is a bit further between these two countries because of different values. So the geographical distance between these two countries is extensive. They're very far away from each other, but they do share a common ocean. So Singapore is located on the tip of Malaysia, which is one of the busiest trade waterways in the world, and this makes trade relatively easy between the two countries due to sharing the Pacific Ocean waterway. And the economic distance of these two countries is also considered very short. Both of these countries have a very well-off population and a high GDP per capita. Singapore has the 4th largest GDP per capita in the world, while the United States is 13th. So the high income in both countries means a relatively high quality of life is found in both these nations. So the citizens will find similar lifestyles, similar living environments, and similar products found within both of these environments. So overall, the distances between these two countries is relatively small, and this can be attributed to Singapore's colonial past, which is still relevant in the modern state. Now, Hannah is going to discuss current events involving Singapore.
Now that we've covered culture, I'll touch on a current event in Singapore. In August of last year, Singapore reported major falls in their economic activity, and this news came after an especially poor second quarter performance in which the country reported negative growth instead of positive. According to CNN, Singapore is greatly affected by the US-China trade war, which has been ongoing for the past couple of years, but tensions have escalated recently. Singapore depends upon China as its greatest source of exports. And as such, experts had previously predicted the GDP for last year to increase by 2%, but with all of the ongoing talks of trade and tensions, they reduced that prediction down to only 0 to 1%. And at the end of last year, that number ended up being 0.7%. And for comparison, the number from 2018, so just a 1-year difference, was over 3% growth. So you can clearly see that Singapore is suffering, and they're desperate for the China-US trade war to end.
In conclusion, Singapore has a population of 5.6 million people and is the largest port in Southeast Asia. Singapore's political structure is a parliamentary democracy with both a president and prime minister. Despite having a very business-friendly economy, the growth rates of Singapore's economy have been slowing down in the recent years. The people of Singapore take pride in their city, and the culture can be categorized as East meets West. The overall distance between the US and Singapore in terms of culture, administration, and economy is not as far as one might expect. Unfortunately, the trade war tensions between the US and China is negatively affecting Singapore's economic growth as they are heading towards a recession. Thank you for watching our video, and we hope that this has served as an educational tool instructing on the current state of business in Singapore.